Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Maher, I'm the director of the Barnum Museum, and I have the great pleasure of being here with my friend and longtime colleague, Gary Payne. Gary's actually been a teacher of mine through the course of many years. In the Barnum Museum collection, if you haven't been here before, we have a massive miniature circus that was created by a gentleman named Bill Brindley when he was 9 years old in 1926. He was inspired by going to see the circus with his father in Wallingford, Connecticut. It was the Christie Circus. He was the little boy that wanted to run away with the circus. And from that moment, he started collecting bits and scraps of wood and boxes, it's what we're gonna talk about today, and created a huge miniature circus that has been part of the Barnum Museum since 1968. We have a small section of it up now. We're still in the COVID period at the time that this is being recorded. But I thought Gary and I would sort of walk down memory lane because at one point in 2005, the Barnum Museum actually had Mr. Brindley set up his second miniature circus. He made 2 of these, and he and his son, Bill Jr., worked to create this, and I had the good fortune of learning how to set up some of the tents and the wagons because there's an incredible science to setting up a real circus. I mean, it's mathematics, it's physics, it's calculations, and you gotta get it right for efficiency. Economics, right? And you know all of this. And I learned.
My old math teachers would get a big kick out of that. I wasn't exactly an A student in the math department.
But it's really true. And I learned all of that on a tiny, tiny scale. So with that, I want to introduce Gary. And we can talk, what we brought out here to tell this story is some of the bits and bobs that Mr. Brindley actually used. I don't want to do all the talking here, but just so people could actually see the level of detail and thinking that went into creating this. Really by a very, very young boy through his entire life. He only died a few years ago.
That's right.
At 99.
Yes.
And
always said he was going to live to be 100. Because he needed that long to create all the seats that were going to go into the big top. So he didn't quite complete those seats, but he was pretty close. He
was pretty darn close. So with that, you really set up the model with him in multiple locations. So the way the story goes, he created the miniature circus. It was like 17 by 50 feet in his backyard in Meredith, Connecticut.
Yeah. He would actually erect it once a year in Wallingford, Connecticut when he was a kid. Driving the stakes into the earth and setting up the tents that comprised
it.
What he called the W.R. Brindley 5-ring circus.
And what we've got here are some of the photographs. I'm going to take this one out as to not have the glare safely, but you can actually see, this is a copy of a photograph of what he looked like setting up one of his little wagons.
That's the earliest photo of him I'm aware of. And he's holding up 2 of his earliest wagons. And in the menagerie behind you, I made sure there were some of his latest wagons and some of the earliest. Those 2 wagons are in the menagerie.
Are in the menagerie. Because as he got older.
He was adamant that every time he displayed or exhibited that he wanted his earliest work shown so that he could show kids what he did when he was 9 years old.
Right, in the 1920s. I mean, think about what was happening in America in the 1920s. I mean, it's the stock market crash. World War I was fairly recent. World War II was on the brink. The Spanish flu was taking place. I mean, it was an extraordinary time. And this is Mr. Brindley, a little older, in his backyard with some of the wagons. This is high school. So right before he went off to World War II, he was in the Army in World War II, stationed in Alaska. And what he told me was he was still carving. And these are some of the things that he used to carve. And you repair a lot of these things for us today because you've been so involved.
Yes.
But
notice how worn that jackknife is.
Can you even imagine? And if you want to hold up the first elephant, this is how it all starts.
Yeah, well, this is the block of wood. It's actually 2 blocks of wood glued together. We call it laminated together. And Bill works in 3/4 inch scale. I work in 1/2 inch scale, which is slightly smaller, but I use exactly the same ideas that he taught me.
Yeah.
So this is sort of beginning stages. This one shows some progress, and this is the complete elephant. And where I come in now as the more or less unofficial caregiver is sometimes you lose the trunk. So I have to carve a new trunk.
Hold up the middle one again. What does that trunk look like in that?
Yeah, that's,
it's there.
He's begun to whittle it down.
I'll show your viewers.
Yep. He's begun to whittle it down from, a full piece of wood. And, notice the legs here and the legs here and the completed elephant. And Bill was a folk artist. There are a lot of people who create what I call circus dioramas. And they don't have the character as does Bill's circus, that for whatever reason sort of magically caused the circus to have that realism that so many dioramas don't have. And Bill did it all with hand tools, a jackknife.
And I mean, look at some of these tools. I mean, if this is not the epitome of makerspace, which is so, it's been
I work in a smaller scale, so I have to use X-Acto knives, Dremel Moto tools. I can't get in 1/2 inch scale the realism that he could with a jackknife.
Really? I mean, look at and so folks know, these are the actual tools that he donated to the museum back in 2005, a few years before he passed away. But this kind of really speaks to the precision that he had to have, because this thing is heavy.
Yes.
And if you're doing something as really seemingly as delicate as that elephant, did you hear that? You really have to master the tools to be able to craft something as fine. And this too, you could talk about this. This is a
so that's a cheese box. Would you eat cheese from a wood box that looked like that?
You have to wonder, but this is a 5-pound craft cheese block.
Yeah.
And
so what that represented to his family was cheese. What it represented to Bill was, future circus wagon.
It's a circus wagon.
And a great deal of what's behind us was built from wood cheese boxes.
It's
scraps of lumber.
Yeah.
Scraps of metal. And, people from all over the country have called to inquire of me if they're interested in making a circus model. My gosh, I can't get my tents to look like Bill Brindley's. What in the world did he use? Bed sheets.
Bed sheets.
Yeah, they make the best circus big top models.
And I'm really glad you said that, because he said to me that he would go and take his mother's good sheets, and she'd come home. And they were very supportive of him, from Mr. Brindley's account. And she would be furious because he used the good sheets, and they'd all turn into big tops or smaller tents, whatever he needed at any given moment.
Absolutely.
And even when we were recreating, this is pre-pandemic, just a facsimile to set up in the museum gallery to suggest a tent. I just ran up to the 3rd floor model and copied what Mr. Brindley did, because it really predated the red and white stripes. Everybody thinks of the red and white stripes. That's a later evolution in circus tent.
Yeah, they were white.
They were white.
They were called the white tops. It was the big top, the sideshow top, the cook top, the horse top, the performing horses top, and they were white, at least on the first day of the season. After a few days of mud, they would look very much like this. Which is why we don't like to switch out to a brand new menagerie or big top, because we kind of want it to look like it really looked like.
That it was used.
Yeah.
And it was respected. It was valuable, so it had to be treated well. And, and they needed, how many people on a big top were in charge of getting that darn thing up and then breaking it down and rolling it immediately to the next site?
So you have a scale model of the Barnum and Bailey big top of the era in which that big top would seat 12,000 people at a single seating.
Incredible.
So you would have a crew just for the big top of several hundred people, and well over 1,000 employees traveling on the circus train to make that show happen. And many times I've said it's for people today to understand what it was then. It was literally Disneyland coming to your town for one day only. Give 2 shows, pack it all up into the wagons onto the circus train, and then travel to the next town in time to do it all over again.
I mean, that's staggering to think about. And it's not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
It's not even 100 years ago that's how the operation
Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey continued on trains until just a couple of years ago when they closed. And they had 2 units of the show on the day that they closed. Each unit had 60 double-length railroad cars. Double-length, they're not your ordinary railroad car. Because you see, years ago, P.T. Barnum figured out that the railroads charged by the car. So his cars went from that long to that long. Yeah, true story. So imagine touring with over 1,000 people on staff, setting up, doing 2 shows for one day only, and feeding all those people 3 times a day. And
educating the students, and they had their clergies. It was a community.
Many people say it should have had its own traveling zip code.
Probably should have.
Yes.
Yeah. So talking about Mr. Brindley too, so when he was 9 years old, one of his prized possessions too, and I'll be careful handling this, this is a little tiny brownie camera. This is the actual camera that he would bring when he was a little guy. He'd sneak under, well, I shouldn't say sneak, he'd go under the tents so he could actually get photographs of all types of elements of the circus up close, whether they were the bleachers, whether they were the workers, but he wanted it to be as scale as possible.
Every single piece of equipment. So he'd crawl under the wagons with his camera. He'd take pictures of the chairs because he needed the dimensions. He needed the dimensions of the wagons, not just left, right, top, and bottom, but each individual piece. Every whipple tree, every wheel.
It's it's fascinating.
And then he imparted that knowledge to me.
See, and there you go.
Did you know that circus wagon wheels have 16 spokes? Not 14, not 20, 16. And if you got it wrong, you'd get a heck of a talking to.
So I had a talking to once by Mr. Brindley. So we were in this room actually, and we were setting up the big tent, and Mr. Brindley Jr. was working. I mean, it took quite a considerable amount of time because we needed to set up the platforms for it as well. And just to move things along, I was the curator of the museum. He said, come on, you need to set up some tents. And I'm like, what? I mean, I've worked on exhibitions all over the place, but there's some rigging involved, even on small scale. So brought me into the model, and he taught me how to lay the tents out and tie the ropes to the poles and lift the poles and have it all precise. I was so proud of myself.
You learned how to tie the half hitch.
Is that what it, okay.
Yeah.
The half hitch.
Yeah. Around the tent stakes.
Around the tent stakes, and I was so proud. I was so proud of myself.
I'm sure if you did it wrong the first few times, that he would have lectured you about. You wouldn't move on until you got it right. It
was the ballerina tent, and he said, you did a great job, but the doorway for the ballerinas is completely on the wrong side. You have to take it down, turn the whole thing around, because those ballerinas cannot run around a tent. They never would have done that in a real show. How to take the whole darn thing down again and put it, and that was a lesson.
Yes.
Clearly, I remember.
I learned all those lessons the same way that you did as a teenager, working with Bill to set up his second road show, very much like this one, in malls and museums and county fairs. And you had to get it right, and he wouldn't let you continue until you had it right and you understood why.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned about the logistics of the American circus. Most people don't realize that every single piece of this model circus packs into its particular wagon and then loads onto the circus train. And there are 35 or 36 cars in Bill Brindley's circus train.
And he even was true to that in packing up the second model. The entire model that was broken down was packed on a series of circus wagons.
Yes.
And then the circus wagons were then loaded into a huge 18-wheeler. And this is how we had to transport everything here. It was a show unto itself.
When it first came here, it was previously displayed, I believe, at Steamtown. And that's how it arrived here, all packed in the wagons, because that's how he traveled.
What's interesting, too, is people don't realize, I mean, this was a serious business for him, too. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yes.
He was was it Butch Cassidy? He was part
Hopalong
of the
Cassidy.
Hopalong Cassidy.
Yes.
He was
Yes.
part of the advanced show.
Yes.
For that.
He traveled in advance of Cole Brothers Circus. And so they would usually Cole Brothers would play large towns like Chicago.
Right, right.
And they would set up at major department stores in Chicago, just one of them, in advance of the circus, and advertise, come and see the free circus at whatever department store it was at. And people did, and of course they were inspired. You know, I mean, this is the world's largest toy. I've spent my life playing with the world's largest toy. Never thought I'd have to wear gloves.
I know.
Bill would laugh at that, but it was the world's largest toy. It was an intriguing story, and then many people would say, "We need to see a real circus." I get that question quite often after people have seen the circus here. I'll get a phone call, "Where can I see a real circus?"
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, did you ever set it up in Atlantic City? Because he did Atlantic City. You set it up in Atlantic City.
No, that was long before me.
That was before you.
He was on the Steel Pier, Hammett's Pier. I know the Hammett family very well, and they are very much aware that Bill Brindley's circus was exhibited on the Steel Pier in Atlantic City. I think he did the entire season there.
He really made a living.
Yes, he did.
Exhibiting this, and he
put his son through college on the income from the circus.
Yeah. So it's in 1968 that the Barnum Museum became the permanent home.
Yes.
I don't quite know which story is so maybe you can enlighten us. Was it Mr. Brindley that approached the museum, or did the museum reach out to Mr. Brindley and say, make this your home? Where? At
the time, the version of the story that I'm aware of, at the time that I became aware of the Brindley Circus, it was at Steamtown. And unfortunately, I was too late to see it there. It had left for the season. I did not know at the time that it came here. Mm-hmm. The version of the story that I've been told many times is that Ken Holmes, who was then the curator here, had seen it or heard about it at Steamtown, and he wanted it for the Barnum Museum. So whether Bill contacted him or it was the other way around, I'm not sure. But it came here, and it made the papers. And enter me, I'm a teenager just like Bill. I'm inspired by the circus. My kids took me to the circus in 1961. It was Clyde Beatty-Cole Brothers Circus. And I sat on the edge of my seat, and I'm still sitting on the edge of my seat. And every time I see a circus or anything like the circus, I'm young again. I really am. And so it's been the elixir of youth for me, as it was for Bill. And he taught me that, you know, Gary, you can have aspirations to join the circus, but it's a lot cheaper to feed a wood elephant than a live elephant. That made my mother happy because she was always afraid I'd run away with the circus. I never ran away with the circus unless you include this one. You
came here today, so let's face it. So moving up into more recent history, so when a little background on the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, for viewers that don't know, the Barnum Museum was incepted by P.T. Barnum. He endowed it, he had it built. It was part of his will. Barnum dies in 1891, so he never gets to see the building completed. The building's completed in 1893. But it went through a major renovation in the 1980s. And from the exhibits and the old photographs that I have from 1970s and stuff, it took on a different life on the third floor of the museum. It was designed very low to the ground, and then there was a large walkway that went around it, so you were even higher above it. So all you saw was the tops of tents. You just saw that white. You know, it was really intended by Mr. Brindley, so you could see into it, almost immerse yourself into it. So the design from the late 1980s here at the Barnum Museum until we dismantled it when the tornado hit, we've tried to go back to the original intention, you know, so people could really look and see the multiple little stories in each element. I mean, that's the thing about the circus. No matter where you look, there's a little story happening. Yes. He adds animation. He includes animatronic figures in the 1950s.
Yes, he used a lot of clock motors.
Yes.
And, you know, it certainly wasn't done on the Disney scale.
Well, in the 1950s, Disney wasn't done on the Disney scale either.
That's correct. And I can remember Bill when we would do the road show and set up for shopping malls. The animatronics were kind of a pain, you know. They were all electric, and you know they were simple clock motors.
And what they were, so folks know, there was like a pancake flipper, and some of the little you know aerialists would twirl.
The horses would circle the ring.
Right.
And Bill would point out to me at times when we had a static display when we would not motorize. He would point out to me that people would stand in front of the same things for a couple of minutes and then move on to the next thing. But for whatever reason, when you plugged it in and all it did was go around, people would stand there kind of mesmerized by motion. And, you know, Walt Disney was very much influenced by the circus and by P.T. Barnum, and so I'm pretty sure he made the same observations and realized that it would cost him a heck of a lot less to pay an animatronic figure over time than human actors in his shows and his rides. Disney was a huge fan of Barnum and the circus.
Absolutely had to have been. You see the influences everywhere. I mean, even in Epcot, you know, Barnum was bringing, you know, performer actors from all over the world simply to wear their traditional clothing and their
you would see that in the sideshow out on the Midway for a separate ticket price before you would go to the show on the big top.
And for Disney, that's Epcot.
Yes,
everybody
absolutely.
that works at a pavilion in the World Showcase is from that.
I know you're a big Disney fan. When you see a parade at Disney, what does that remind you of?
It harkens back to these magnificent spectaculars that would come into every town. You know, the carriages, the costumes, the gilding. I mean, it was captivating and mesmerizing.
So what Bill Brindley taught me through the miniature circus, every time we would set up, you know, it would take us 2 grueling 12-hour days. There was 48 man-hours in every setup, almost to the hour. If we could shave an hour off of that, it was a big deal. And in doing that, a piece at a time, Bill would describe to me how it was done on the circus. And so when I come here to set up something, it might look like a daunting task, but I don't need a drawing, I don't need a blueprint, I don't need a photo. I know exactly how it goes together because to me, I grew up with it. It's the world's largest toy.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of fun.
And honestly, it's an art form. And a real important thing for us to do is to get you on camera because I can't do this. There needs to be another generation. I respect it, I honor it. I had my few lessons from Mr. Brindley himself, but it is a precision, like I said, an art form unto itself. So I'm excited about, there's a whole swell of tech-savvy youth, you know, coming up that are taking on a whole new appreciation for the American circus as an art, as an industry unto itself. And my hope is that the future is going to be able to see this, have total respect for it, understand it intuitively as you do.
That might mean a few moms are going to have some bed sheets go missing.
So with that, we can, you know, wrap it up with a parting thought about Mr. Brindley and maybe one of your most interesting recollections of your time spent with Mr. Brindley?
Well, you know, touring the miniature circus had some of the same problems and obstacles that a real circus would have. One of the locations that we set up in was the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford. And I had worked with Bill many times setting up the exhibit. And again, we had 48 man-hours, so we would set 2 days aside. And I would travel to Meredith the night before, stay overnight with the Brindleys, have dinner. Mrs. Brindley was a wonderful cook. And we'd get on the road the next day, and we knew, we were very regimented about exactly how we had to do things. And when we showed up at the Wadsworth, and Bill pointed out the space to me because I had not seen it, I realized that we had that big fountain to drain, and we had to assemble the circus around that giant statue.
Oh my gosh.
And on another occasion, we had to assemble it around a lamppost. And on one occasion, I showed up first and realized at a shopping mall that the space that we had seen 6 months previous now had 4 giant palm trees in urns that big that I couldn't move that, and we had 48 man-hours to do that, and in the middle of the night, I had to find somebody with the equipment to move those 4 palm trees so that we could assemble the circus and be open, because we had an opening day to
hard open.
Yeah.
There's no playing with that.
Yeah. So I learned a lot about the trials and tribulations of the show business, and that even though the elephants were wooden, we didn't have to worry about feeding them. That I was on occasion going to have some problems to solve.
Always.
Yes.
There's always so working with us here is kind of easy.
Yeah, it's this piece of cake. We've done this before. Barnum taught us how to do things, didn't he?
He taught us to be resilient.
Yes.
Struggles and triumphs
So
at the end
a
of
little
the day.
adversity just means that the next appearance of the Barnum Museum and the Brindley Circus is going to be even greater than in the past. Everything is bigger and better.
Now that's Barnum, and his mantra, the noblest art is that of making others happy. So what a noble cause. Your entire lifetime dedicated to working with this miniature circus. You've made countless millions happy.
I probably never realized that until very recently, thanks to you.
I'm a giver. So with that, I'm going to encourage you to learn more about the circus. We have extraordinary colleagues. Go online and look for the Tibble circus model at our friends down at the Ringling Museum of Art. It's a glorious model, completely different from Mr. Brindley's. And you can see the real incredible wagons at the Circus World Museum in Baraboo. So, go online and find the Circus World. And of course, there's incredible archives at so many locations. The Milner Gallery. Reach out to the Barnum Museum, please. If you enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe. We love having more and more viewers. Leave a comment below. We will absolutely get back to you. We appreciate it, and please, if you can, make a donation to the museum. Help us, keep this story going and bringing you more content. We truly appreciate it. But Gary, I can't thank you enough for all not just today, but all the years that you've dedicated to the museum.
Thank you, Kathy, for bringing me home. I've lived in 9 or 10 different homes, and this is the constant home in my life. So I really appreciate being here today.
Absolute joy. Thank you. Come again.
Thank you.